The storm had rolled in faster than Jesse Carver had reckoned. One moment, the horizon had been clear under a pale winter sun. The next, grey clouds had gathered like wolves circling prey. The wind came howling across the open stretch of Montana land, carrying sheets of snow that swallowed the trail and blurred the ridgelines. Jesse tugged the brim of his hat lower and leaned forward in the saddle, his horse snorting as it pressed on through the deepening drifts. The world was silence and white fury, a wilderness that seemed intent on burying every living thing beneath it. Jesse was no stranger to storms. He'd spent years riding the cattle trails, crossing deserts and rivers, enduring rain that came sideways and heat that cracked the earth. But this storm was something else. The snow was thick, heavy, unrelenting, a storm that wanted to erase. He muttered to his horse, "Easy there, Scout. We'll find shelter soon enough." His voice disappeared into the wind, swallowed like a pebble thrown in the ocean. That was when Scout jerked his head, nostrils flaring, hooves stamping nervously. Jesse pulled the reins, scanning the white blur around him. At first he thought he saw nothing but a drift piled against a fallen log. But then the drift moved. Or maybe his eyes were playing tricks. He dismounted, boots sinking deep into the snow, and crouched low. It wasn't a drift, it was a person. A woman lay half buried, her body curled into itself, her clothes stiff with ice. Her hair, what strands weren't plastered to her cheeks, was dark and dusted with frost. Her lips were blue. Her breathing was so shallow, Jesse had to put his hand near her mouth to feel the faint warmth of it. "Hellfire," he whispered, his stomach knotting. In weather like this, no one lasted long alone. He shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her small frame, pulling her gently free from the snow's grip. She was lighter than he expected, fragile as a bird fallen from the sky. Her eyelids fluttered, and for a heartbeat, her eyes cracked open. They were a deep grey, filled with confusion and a flicker of fear. Her lips trembled as if trying to form a word, but only a faint sound escaped like the sigh of the wind. "Don't talk," Jesse murmured. "Save your strength. You're safe now." "You're safe now." He lifted her onto Scout, holding her close against his chest to keep her from slipping. Then he swung up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and steering the horse toward the narrow canyon he knew cut through the ridge. Somewhere in there, he had a cabin he'd built years ago, a place he hadn't intended to visit again so soon. But now it was their only chance. The ride felt endless. Jesse's fingers were stiff with cold, his arms aching as he cradled the stranger against him. She barely moved, her breath shallow and irregular. Each time he felt her weaken, he whispered again, half to her and half to himself, "I'll keep you warm till spring. You hear me? Till spring, and after, if need be." By the time the cabin came into sight, its roof heavy with snow, smoke from the last visit long gone, the storm had deepened into a white wall. Jesse kicked the door open, carried her inside, and laid her on the cot by the fire pit. He moved quickly, piling wood into the hearth, striking flint until flames leapt and shadows danced across the log walls. The warmth filled the room, but the woman's body was still cold as ice. Jesse stripped off her frozen boots and gloves, rubbing her hands between his calloused palms. He spoke to her as he worked, his voice low and steady, like he was soothing a spooked horse. "Don't you go giving up on me now. You held on this long out there. You can hold on a little longer. I've seen men with worse odds come through. You ain't done yet." Her lips parted, a soft moan escaping. Jessie leaned closer, catching faint words. "Don't let them." Her voice broke and her eyes rolled back. Jessie frowned. "Don't let who?" But she didn't answer. He wrapped her in every blanket he had, laying his coat over her for good measure, and sat beside the fire, watching her chest rise and fall. He had questions. Too many questions. Who was she? What devil had left her to die in the snow? But those could wait. For now, the only thing that mattered was keeping her alive. The storm roared outside, rattling the shutters and piling snow against the door. Inside, Jesse set vigil, his rifle within reach, his gaze fixed on the fragile stranger who had stumbled, unasked, into his solitary life. Somewhere deep inside, a truth he'd buried years ago stirred awake. Sometimes fate didn't ask permission. Sometimes it just dropped into your arms, cold and half dead, and dared you to see what you'd do next. The snow began to soften weeks later, though winter still clung to the land like a jealous lover. Inside, the fire still burned day and night, though it no longer had to fight against the brutal grip of January's storms. Jesse sat by the hearth, mending a saddle strap, when he heard the rustle of blankets behind him. She stirred. Her eyes, storm-gray, like the sky before lightning, opened and found him. For the first time since he'd carried her from the snow, her voice came clear enough to cut through the crackle of flames. "You never asked my name." Jesse set down the strap and looked at her. Her cheeks had color now, her lips no longer blue, though she was still thinner than she should have been. "I didn't figure it was mine to ask. Not till you were ready to give it." She studied him for a long moment, as though weighing whether he could be trusted with the truth. Then she whispered, Clara Monroe." The name stirred something faint in Jesse's memory, though he couldn't place it right away. Clara," he repeated, like testing the sound of it. "I'm Jesse Carver." "I know who you are," she said softly, eyes flicking toward the rifle resting by the wall. "You were a trail rider once. Folks said you could find water in a desert, cattle in a blizzard." He raised a brow. "I didn't know I was famous." "Not famous," she corrected, "but known. My father used to speak of men like you, men who could endure anything." Jesse leaned back in his chair, the firelight throwing shadows across his lined face. "Your father, who was he?" Clara hesitated, her hands tightening on the blanket as though it were her last shield. Finally, she said, "A John Monroe, rancher. Maybe you've heard of him." And then Jesse remembered. John Monroe, landholder with thousands of acres, cattle enough to feed half the territory. A man with money, enemies, and a reputation for fairness, until word spread that he'd been betrayed from within his own circle. "Your pa's dead," Jesse said quietly, the memory coming back sharp as a knife. "He heard he was shot down last autumn. Whole territory talked about it." Clara's eyes glistened, though she didn't cry. Her voice was steady when she said, "Yes, shot by men who worked for him, men he trusted." And Jesse asked, though he already suspected. Land, money, greed. Her jaw clenched. "They wanted everything he built, and they wanted me gone too. I barely escaped. I thought if I could make it across the mountains, maybe I'd have a chance. And instead you near froze to death," Jesse said. She gave a small, humorless smile. "Yes, guess fate had other plans." Silence stretched between them, filled by the crackle of the fire. Jesse studied her face, the strength hidden beneath the exhaustion, the resolve that hadn't been broken despite the storm, despite the betrayal. She was her father's daughter. That much was clear. "You know they'll come after you," Jesse said finally. "Men like that don't leave loose ends." Her gaze flickered to his, steady as steel. "I know." Jesse leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Then you've got two choices."